The sound of Danny's feet running away from the stairs echoed through the house like a warning bell that Marla couldn't ignore anymore. For 3 weeks now, her 9-year-old son had found every excuse in the world to avoid going upstairs. He'd rather sleep on the living room couch, use the downstairs bathroom, and leave his toys scattered on the first floor than climb those 13 wooden steps to his bedroom. Marla stood at the bottom of the staircase, her hand gripping the banister as she stared into the dimly lit hallway above. The afternoon sun barely reached the top landing, leaving shadows that seemed to dance and whisper secrets she couldn't understand. Something was wrong. A mother knows these things in her bones, in the way her child's laughter has become forced, in the way his eyes dart toward the stairs with genuine terror. "Danny, honey, your backpack is upstairs," she called softly, watching as her son froze near the kitchen doorway, his small shoulders tense like a rabbit sensing a predator. When he turned to face her, those big brown eyes, once so full of mischief and joy, held something that made her stomach clench with dread. "I don't need it today, Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Can I stay down here?" Marla's heart broke a little more. When had her brave little boy, who used to slide down these same banisters and race up the steps 2 at a time, become so afraid? When had the home she'd worked so hard to make safe become a place of terror for her own child? She knelt down to his level, studying his face. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually rosy cheeks looked pale and hollow. "Baby, what's wrong? What's upstairs that scares you so much?" Danny's lips trembled, and for a moment, she thought he might tell her, but then his gaze shifted past her shoulder, and she heard the familiar sound of Rick's key in the front door. Her new husband's arrival seemed to drain what little color remained from Danny's face. "Nothing, Mom," he said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just being silly." But as Rick's warm voice filled the entryway with cheerful greetings, Marla couldn't shake the feeling that her son was trying to tell her something far more important than words could express. Something that made a 9-year-old boy afraid of his own home, his own bedroom, his own stairs. Something that made the darkness upstairs feel alive and threatening. The truth was waiting for her up there, lurking behind a door she didn't even know existed. And when she finally found the courage to climb those 13 steps, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. Marla waited until Rick left for his evening business meeting and Danny was distracted by cartoons downstairs before she made her decision. The stairs creaked under her weight as she climbed them for the first time in days, each step echoing her growing determination to understand what had transformed her happy child into a shadow of himself. Danny's bedroom looked normal at first glance. His superhero posters still covered the walls. His toy chest sat in the corner overflowing with action figures and building blocks. But there was something different about the energy in the room, something that made the hair on her arms stand up as if electricity crackled in the air. She began with his dresser, checking drawers with the methodical precision of a mother who knew her child's habits. Nothing unusual. His closet revealed the same innocent mess of clothes, shoes, and forgotten treasures. But as she knelt beside his unmade bed, something caught her eye, a corner of white paper peeking out from beneath the mattress. Her timbers trembled as she pulled out the first crumpled note, smoothing it carefully on her lap. The childish handwriting was unmistakably Danny's, written in the careful block letters she'd taught him when he was learning to write. "Dear God, please make him stop. I try to be good, but he says I'm bad. Please help me. Love, Danny." Marla's breath caught in her throat. She reached under the bed again, her hands finding more papers, dozens of them, all written in her son's desperate scrawl. Each one was a prayer, a plea, a cry for help that made her blood run cold. "God, I know you're busy, but can you please make Mom see? I can't tell her because he said bad things will happen. Dear Jesus, I'm scared to sleep. Can you send angels to watch my door? The man Mom married isn't nice when she's not here. God, why won't you answer? I've been praying every night. Please don't let him come upstairs anymore." The papers fell from her shaking hands like autumn leaves, each one a piece of evidence that her world was built on lies. Her son, her precious, innocent 9-year-old son, had been crying out to God for protection while she slept peacefully downstairs, oblivious to his terror. Marla sank onto the bed, her mind reeling. Rick had been so perfect, so patient with Danny, so loving toward both of them. The community loved him. Her friends envied her for finding such a wonderful man after Danny's father had abandoned them. How could she have been so blind? But as she gathered the notes with trembling fingers, reading prayer after desperate prayer, she realized that Danny hadn't been blind at all. While she saw Rick's charming smile and helpful nature, her son had seen something else entirely. Something dark enough to drive a child to his knees in desperate prayer night after night. The house suddenly felt different around her, as if the walls themselves had been keeping secrets. And somewhere above her head, she could swear she heard a sound, a gentle creaking that shouldn't be there, coming from an attic she had never fully explored. Her son's faith had never wavered, even when his mother had failed to see the truth. But God had been listening to every whispered prayer, every desperate plea, every tear-stained note hidden beneath a little boy's bed. The question now was whether Marla would finally have the courage to hear what her child had been trying to tell her all along. The sound came again the next morning, a soft thudding from somewhere above Danny's room that made Marla's coffee cup freeze halfway to her lips. Rick had left early for work and Danny was at school, leaving the house wrapped in a silence that amplified every creak and whisper of the old building. Armed with her son's desperate prayers still fresh in her memory, Marla climbed to the second floor and pulled down the attic ladder she'd barely used since moving in. The wooden rungs protested under her weight as she ascended into the dusty darkness above. The attic stretched larger than she'd expected, filled with cardboard boxes and old furniture from the previous owners. Pale morning light filtered through a small window at the far end, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. But as her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. There, partially hidden behind a stack of moldy boxes, was a door. Not just any door, but a heavy wooden barrier with fresh scratches around the lock and a brass handle that gleamed as if it had been recently polished. This wasn't some forgotten storage closet. This door had been used, and recently. Marla approached it with growing dread, her footsteps muffled by years of accumulated dust. The door was locked, but as she examined it closer, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Small scratch marks lined the doorframe at a height that perfectly matched her 9-year-old son's reach, as if tiny fingernails had clawed desperately at the wood. "Oh God," she whispered, her voice echoing in the confined space. "What is this place?" The brass doorknob wouldn't turn, but as she pressed her ear against the wood, she could swear she heard something on the other side. A faint rustling like papers being shuffled or someone moving carefully to avoid detection. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from Rick. "Having lunch with clients. Won't be home until late. Kiss Danny for me." The casual affection in his message now felt sinister, loaded with meaning she was only beginning to understand. How many times had Rick been in this attic while she was downstairs, oblivious? How many times had Danny heard footsteps above his room and known exactly who was up there? Marla backed away from the door, her mind racing. She needed to get inside that room, needed to see what Rick had been hiding. But more than that, she needed to protect her son from whatever evil had taken root in their home. As she climbed back down the attic ladder, her legs shaking with adrenaline and fear, she made a silent promise to the boy who had been praying for protection while she slept peacefully below. She would find the truth no matter how much it hurt. She would unlock every door, confront every lie, and fight every battle necessary to keep her child safe. Because sometimes when parents fail to see the truth, God works through their love to open their eyes. And Marla's eyes were finally, terrifyingly wide open. The locked door in the attic wasn't just hiding Rick's secrets. It was holding back the truth that would change everything. And tonight, when Rick came home with his charming smile and gentle words, Marla would be ready to demand the key. That evening, Marla watched her family with new eyes. Rick arrived home at 7:30 with his usual warm smile and a bouquet of grocery store flowers. The same gesture that had once melted her heart now felt calculated, performed. Danny sat at the kitchen table working on homework, but his shoulders tensed the moment his stepfather's key turned in the lock. "How are my two favorite people?" Rick asked, kissing Marla's cheek while ruffling Danny's hair. The boy flinched so slightly that someone who wasn't looking for it might have missed it entirely. But Marla was looking now, really looking, and the tiny recoil from her son's body hit her like a physical blow. "We're good," Danny mumbled, not lifting his eyes from his math worksheet. His pencil grip was so tight his knuckles had gone white. Rick moved through their evening routine with practiced ease. helping with dinner, asking about Danny's day, sharing amusing stories from his work. To any observer, he was the picture of a devoted stepfather. But Marla noticed things she'd somehow missed before. How Danny never fully relaxed when Rick was in the room. How her son found excuses to stay close to her. How his laughter sounded hollow and forced. During dinner, Rick reached over to wipe a spot of sauce from Danny's chin, a gesture that should have been tender but made the boy freeze like a deer in headlights. "There you go, buddy," Rick said softly, his hand lingering just a moment too long on Danny's face. "I can do it myself," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. "Of course you can, sport. I was just helping." Rick's tone remained patient and kind, but Marla caught something else underneath, a subtle edge that suggested this was a conversation they'd had before. Later, as Rick settled into his favorite chair to watch the news, Danny approached Marla in the kitchen with his empty plate. "Mom, can I sleep on the couch again tonight?" he asked quietly, his eyes darting toward the living room where Rick sat. "Honey, you need to sleep in your own bed. You'll get a better night's sleep there." "Please, Mom?" The desperation in his voice was unmistakable now, raw and pleading. "My room it's too cold upstairs." Before Marla could answer, Rick's voice carried from the other room. "Danny, big boys sleep in their own beds. Your mom and I talked about this. No more couch sleeping. You're getting too old for that nonsense." The authority in Rick's voice brooked no argument, but Marla saw something flash across Danny's face, pure terror, quickly masked by resigned acceptance. Her son nodded slowly and began walking toward the stairs, each step looking like he was marching to his execution. "Actually," Marla heard herself saying, "I think it's fine if Danny sleeps downstairs tonight. It's Friday. He can stay up a little later and watch a movie with us." Rick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Marla, we discussed this. Consistency is important for children. Rules are rules." But something in her son's grateful expression told her that this small act of defiance was more important than keeping peace with her husband. For the first time in months, Danny's smile reached his eyes. That night, as Rick went upstairs alone and Danny settled safely on the living room couch, Marla stayed awake listening to the sounds of her house. Around midnight, she heard footsteps above, slow, deliberate movements that seemed to pause outside Danny's empty bedroom before continuing toward the attic. The locked door up there wasn't just hiding secrets, she realized. It was a symbol of all the ways Rick controlled their home, all the boundaries he'd created while she wasn't paying attention. Tomorrow, she would find a way inside that room. Tonight, she would keep her son safe downstairs, where his desperate prayers had finally been heard by a mother who was ready to see the truth. Saturday morning came too soon. Rick left early for golf, claiming he needed to network with potential clients, but his departure felt more like an escape. Danny remained unusually quiet, picking at his cereal while avoiding his mother's concerned gaze. Marla had barely slept. Every creak of the house had sounded like footsteps, every whisper of wind like voices carrying secrets she couldn't quite understand. The image of that locked attic door burned in her mind like a brand. "Danny," she said gently, settling beside him at the kitchen table, "I found something yesterday, something that made me realize you've been trying to tell me something very important." Her son's spoon clattered against his bowl. His face went pale as winter morning light. "I found your prayers, sweetheart, under your bed." Danny's eyes filled with tears so quickly it broke her heart. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I wrote them. I know I'm not supposed to bother God with stupid things, and I know you love Rick, and I don't want to make you sad, but—" "Oh, baby." Marla pulled him into her arms, feeling his small body shake against hers. "Your prayers aren't stupid. They're never stupid. And you're not bothering God. You're not bothering anyone." "But Rick said—" Danny's voice choked off abruptly, as if he'd caught himself saying something forbidden. "What did Rick say, honey?" Marla's voice remained gentle, but inside a cold fury was building. "You can tell me anything, I promise." Danny pulled back to look at her, tears streaming down his cheeks. "He said that if I told you things about him, you wouldn't love me anymore. He said you'd send me away because you chose him over me, and that God doesn't listen to bad kids who lie about grown-ups." Each word hit Marla like a physical blow. Her perfect husband, her children's champion, had been systematically terrorizing her 9-year-old son with lies designed to ensure his silence.
Danny, listen to me very carefully. She cupped his face in her hands. I will never, ever send you away. You are the most important person in my whole world. Nothing and no one will ever change that. Do you understand me? Danny nodded, but she could see the doubt that Rick had planted still taking root in his young mind. Now, I need you to be very brave and tell me the truth about what's been happening. What made you so afraid to go upstairs? The story came out in broken whispers and tear-stained confessions, Rick coming to his room after Marla fell asleep, inappropriate touching that started as games and escalated to things that made Danny feel dirty and ashamed, the locked attic room where Rick kept photos and videos that he said were their special secret, the threats about what would happen if Danny ever told anyone. He said if I was a good boy and didn't tell, he'd stop, Danny sobbed against his mother's shoulder. But he never stopped, Mom. He just kept coming back, and I kept praying, and I thought maybe God didn't hear me because I was being bad somehow. Marla held her son tighter than she'd ever held anyone in her life, her own tears mingling with his as the full scope of her failure crashed over her. While she'd been playing house with a monster, her child had been suffering in silence, turning to God with the desperate faith of the innocent. God heard every single prayer, baby. He heard them all, and He's going to help us make sure Rick can never hurt you again. You are not bad. You are not dirty. You are precious and perfect and loved, and none of this was ever your fault. As she rocked her sobbing son in the morning light, Marla made silent promises that would shake the foundations of their world. She would tear apart every lie Rick had built. She would unlock every door, expose every secret, and burn down the house of deception brick by brick if necessary. Because God had finally opened her eyes to the truth her son's prayers had been revealing all along, that monsters don't always look like monsters. And sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who betray us most completely. But love was stronger than betrayal. Faith was more powerful than fear. And a mother's fury, once awakened, could move mountains and topple kingdoms. The real battle was just beginning.
Marla spent the afternoon in a whirlwind of phone calls and preparation. First, she called her sister to arrange for Danny to stay there overnight, just a family emergency, she explained, not ready to voice the full horror yet. Then she contacted a friend who worked with Child Protective Services, carefully gathering information about what would happen next, what evidence would be needed, and how to protect her son through the legal process ahead. By the time Rick's car pulled into the driveway at 5:30, Marla had transformed from the naive wife who'd made breakfast that morning into a warrior prepared for battle. She'd found Rick's spare keyring in his dresser drawer, the one with keys she'd never seen before, and had already made copies. Danny was safely at his aunt's house, believing they were just having an impromptu sleepover. He didn't need to be here for what was about to happen. "Honey, I'm home," Rick called from the entryway, his voice carrying the same cheerful tone that had once made her heart skip. Now it made her stomach turn with revulsion. "In the kitchen," she replied, her voice steady, despite the rage burning in her chest. Rick appeared in the doorway with his familiar smile, loosening his tie. "Where's Danny? House seems quiet." "He's at Sarah's for the night." Marla turned to face him, and something in her expression made his smile falter slightly. "We need to talk." "Of course. What's on your mind?" He moved to pour himself a glass of water, still playing the role of the devoted husband, but she could see wariness creeping into his posture. "I know what you've been doing to my son." The glass slipped from Rick's hand, shattering against the kitchen floor. Water spread across the tiles like spilled truth, impossible to contain. For a moment, his mask completely dropped, and Marla saw something cold and calculating flash across his features before he forced the concerned husband expression back into place. "Marla, what are you talking about? Danny's been acting out lately. Kids sometimes make up stories when they're adjusting to new family dynamics." "Don't." Her voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "Don't you dare try to gaslight me. I found his prayers, Rick. Dozens of them, hidden under his bed. A 9-year-old boy begging God to protect him from the man I brought into his life."
Rick's jaw tightened, and she saw him calculating, trying to determine how much she knew and what story might still work. Children have vivid imaginations. Maybe he's been watching too much TV, or maybe he misinterpreted. The attic room. 2 words that made Rick's face go completely white. The locked door you thought I'd never find? I'm going up there tonight, and I'm taking those keys you hide in your dresser. For the first time since she'd known him, Rick's careful composure cracked completely. The charming mask fell away, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. "You don't understand," he said with a dangerous whisper. "That boy is manipulative. He's been trying to come between us since day one. He's jealous of what we have, and he'll say anything to destroy it." "He's 9 years old." Marla's voice rose to a shout that echoed off the kitchen walls. "He's a child who trusted you, who called you dad, who tried so hard to make you love him while you were destroying his innocence." Rick stepped toward her, and for the first time, she saw the man her son had been afraid of. Gone was the patient stepfather, replaced by someone whose eyes held a coldness that made her blood run cold. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said quietly. "You think you're protecting him, but you're about to destroy this family. Everything you've built, everything we have together, gone. And for what? A few childish complaints? For my son," Marla said simply, "for the child you hurt while I trusted you, for every prayer he whispered in the dark while you made his life a nightmare." The sound of sirens in the distance made Rick freeze. Marla had called the police before he came home, had given them just enough information to ensure they'd arrive with a warrant for that locked room. "You called them," Rick breathed, with his face twisting with rage and disbelief. "I called them," she confirmed, "because Danny's prayers were heard. Maybe not the way he expected, maybe not as quickly as he hoped, but God was listening, and now justice is coming." As the sirens grew louder and Rick realized his perfect life was crumbling around him, Marla thought of her son, safe at his aunt's house, finally able to sleep without fear. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, truth was winning over deception. And somewhere in her heart, she could almost hear the echo of a child's faithful prayers finally being answered.
The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights, official questions, and the systematic dismantling of Rick's carefully constructed lies. The police officers who arrived were professionals who'd seen too many cases like this one. Their efficiency was both reassuring and heartbreaking in its familiarity. The locked attic room revealed horrors that made even seasoned detectives pause. Photography equipment, computer files, and evidence of abuse that extended far beyond what had been done to Danny. Other children, other families, other mothers who'd never known the monster they'd welcomed into their homes. Detective Samuel, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, sat with Marla in the living room while officers worked upstairs. "Mrs. Kennedy, I need you to know that this investigation will take time. There will be court dates, testimony, difficult questions for both you and Danny. Are you prepared for that?" Marla thought of her son, finally sleeping peacefully at his aunt's house, and found strength she didn't know she possessed. Whatever it takes to make sure he can never hurt another child. The evidence we're finding suggests this has been going on for some time. Your son's courage in finally speaking up may have saved other children from going through what he experienced. The words hit Marla like a revelation. Danny's faith hadn't just protected him. It had become a beacon of protection for children she'd never meet, families she'd never know. His whispered prayers in the darkness had set in motion a chain of justice that reached far beyond their small house. 3 weeks later, Marla sat in a courthouse with Danny beside her, his small hand gripping hers with surprising strength. The courtroom was packed with other families, other mothers whose worlds had been shattered by Rick's lies. Danny had insisted on testifying despite his youth, determined to speak for himself and the other children who couldn't. When the judge read Rick's sentence, 15 years with no possibility of parole, the courtroom erupted in tears of relief and gratitude. Rick himself sat motionless, the charming mask finally discarded forever, replaced by the orange jumpsuit that marked him for what he'd always been. As they left the courthouse that afternoon, Danny tugged on Marla's sleeve. "Mom,
do you think God heard all our prayers? Marlon knelt down to meet his eyes, seeing strength and wisdom far beyond his years shining in their depths. Baby, I think God heard every single word, and I think he used your brave voice to protect so many other children. Danny nodded solemnly, then surprised her with a smile that was purely his own, no longer shadowed by fear or secrets. I knew he was listening. Even when I was scared, I knew he wouldn't forget about me. The other families from the courthouse began to gather around them, and Marla realized that Danny's story had become part of something much larger than their personal nightmare. His faith had sparked a movement of truth that would ripple out in ways they might never fully understand. Detective Samuel approached them as they reached the courthouse steps. Danny, I wanted you to know that your testimony helped us identify 3 other children who'd been hurt. They're safe now thanks to your courage. Danny's chest puffed out with quiet pride. Really? God used me to help other kids? He absolutely did, the detective confirmed. You're a hero, young man. As they walked toward their car, Marla felt a deep sense of peace settling over them both. The legal battle was over, but more importantly, the spiritual battle had been won. Danny's unwavering faith had been their salvation, and God's justice had prevailed in ways that human courts could barely comprehend.
That night, for the first time in months, Danny asked to sleep in his own room. Marla tucked him into his bed, the same bed where she'd found his desperate prayers, and watched as he knelt beside it for his evening prayer. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice clear and unafraid, "thank you for listening to all my scared prayers. Thank you for helping Mom see the truth. Thank you for making sure other kids are safe now. And thank you for never leaving me alone, even in the dark." Marla's eyes filled with tears as she realized she was witnessing something profound. Her son's faith hadn't just survived his trauma, it had been refined by it, strengthened by the knowledge that God truly does hear the cries of his children. "Danny," she said softly as he climbed into bed, "I need to ask for your forgiveness. I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you better." Danny considered this with the serious expression of a child who'd been forced to grow up too quickly. "Mom, remember how my Sunday school teacher said that God can use even bad things for good? Maybe you couldn't see because it wasn't time yet. Maybe God had to wait until just the right moment to open your eyes so that all those other kids could be saved too." His wisdom took her breath away. While she'd been consumed with guilt over her blindness, her 9-year-old son had already found the spiritual truth she was struggling to grasp, that God's timing is perfect even when we can't understand it. Over the following weeks, as they began the long journey of healing, Marla watched her son's faith become a beacon for their entire family. When nightmares came, Danny would whisper prayers until peace returned. When anger threatened to consume Marla's heart, Danny would remind her that God's justice was bigger than human revenge. The local church, when they heard Danny's story, asked if he would share his experience with other children who'd faced similar trauma. Standing at the front of the sanctuary, looking so small behind the podium, Danny spoke with a clarity that silenced the entire congregation. Sometimes bad things happen to kids, and it's not our fault. Sometimes grown-ups we trust do things that hurt us, and they tell us God doesn't care about us. But that's a lie. God hears every prayer, even the ones we whisper in the dark when we're too scared to talk out loud. He knows when we're hurting, and he's always working to keep us safe, even when we can't see how. An elderly woman in the front row wiped tears from her eyes and called out, "How do you know, sweetheart? How can you be so sure?" Danny's answer would be remembered by everyone present for years to come. "Because I prayed every single night for months, and God answered every single prayer. Maybe not the way I expected, and maybe not as fast as I wanted, but he answered them all. He gave me a mom who loves me enough to fight for me. He sent the police to stop the bad man. He helped other kids get safe. And most importantly, he never, ever let me face the scary times alone." The sanctuary erupted in spontaneous applause, but Marla saw something more precious than human approval in her son's face. The deep, unshakable peace of a child who knows he is beloved by the creator of the universe. Later that night, as they walked up their stairs together, stairs that no longer held any terror, Danny paused on the landing and looked up at where the attic used to hide secrets. "Mom, do you think God's angels were really watching over me all those nights?" Marla followed his gaze, remembering the locked door that had held such horror, now emptied and cleansed. "I think God's angels never left your side, baby, and I think they're still there, celebrating with us now." Danny nodded with satisfaction. "I can feel them sometimes. They make the house feel safe again." As they said goodnight and Danny settled into his bed with a smile, Marla realized that her son's faith had done more than save them from Rick's evil. It had transformed their entire understanding of God's love. They'd learned that divine protection doesn't always prevent suffering, but it never abandons us in our suffering. They discovered that God's justice moves in mysterious ways, often using the most unlikely voices to speak His truth. Most importantly, they had experienced firsthand that when children cry out to God in their innocence and desperation, heaven itself bends to listen. 6 months later, Marla stood in her kitchen making Danny's favorite pancakes while he got ready for school upstairs. The sound of his footsteps running down the stairs, a sound that had once filled her with dread, now made her smile with pure joy. Each step was light and carefree, the way a 9-year-old's footsteps should be. "Mom, I can't find my baseball glove," Danny called as he bounded into the kitchen, his face bright with the excitement of childhood recovered. "Check the hall closet, sweetie, and slow down. You've got plenty of time." But Marla secretly loved his newfound energy, his eagerness to engage with life again. The shadow that had haunted his eyes for so many months had lifted completely, replaced by the natural curiosity and joy that had always been his true nature. Their house felt different now, too. The walls that had once held secrets now echoed with laughter. The stairs that had been a source of terror were now just stairs. Worn wooden steps that led to a boys' room filled with art projects, baseball trophies, and books about space exploration. The attic had been completely renovated. Where Rick's locked door had hidden unspeakable things, Denny now had an art studio where he spent hours drawing pictures of angels and writing thank you letters to God. The transformation was so complete that visitors never would have guessed the darkness that had once lived in that space. Danny found his glove and sat down to his pancakes, chattering about his upcoming Little League game. "Mrs. Peterson says I might get to pitch next week, and guess what? Tommy Samuel wants to come over after school. His mom said it's okay because she knows you're one of the good ones." Marla smiled at the reference to Detective Samuel, who had become a family friend. The detective's own son, Tommy, had been drawn to Danny's quiet strength and unshakable optimism, and their friendship had been healing for both boys. "That sounds wonderful, honey. What do you want to do when Tommy comes over?" "I want to show him my angel drawings and maybe we can pray together. He says his mom taught him that prayer is like having a direct phone line to God, and I want to tell him about all the times God answered my calls." The casual way Danny spoke about prayer now, without fear, without desperation, just as a natural part of his daily conversation with his Heavenly Father, never failed to move Marla to tears. His faith had evolved from the desperate pleas of a frightened child to the confident trust of someone who had experienced God's faithfulness firsthand. As she watched him finish his breakfast and pack his backpack, Marla reflected on how far they'd both come. She'd learned to forgive herself for the blindness that had nearly cost them everything. More importantly, she'd learned to trust in God's perfect timing and mysterious ways. The counseling sessions had helped, and the support of their church family had been invaluable. But it was Danny's unshakable faith that had been their true source of healing. His ability to find God's goodness even in the midst of horror had taught her more about divine love than any sermon ever could. "Ready for school, Mom?" Danny asked as he slung his backpack over his shoulder. "Ready when you are, kiddo." As they walked to the car together, Danny suddenly stopped and looked back at their house. "You know what I love most about living here now?" "What's that, sweetheart?" "God's not just in my prayers anymore. He's everywhere. In the kitchen when we make pancakes, on the stairs when I run down them, even in the attic where I draw my pictures. The whole house feels like a safe place now." Marla squeezed his hand. "It is a safe place now, and it always will be."
Danny nodded with satisfaction. That's because we're not keeping any secrets from God anymore, and secrets were what made the house scary in the first place. His simple wisdom struck her as profound truth. Secrets had indeed been the source of their darkness, and transparency had been the key to their healing. In learning to bring everything into God's light, the good, the bad, and the unspeakably ugly, they'd discovered the peace that passes understanding. That evening, as Marla took Danny into his bed and listened to his prayers of gratitude rather than desperation, she offered her own silent prayer. Thank you, God, for hearing a child's cries. Thank you for opening a mother's eyes. Thank you for proving that your love is stronger than any darkness and your justice more powerful than any evil. Danny's voice interrupted her thoughts. Mom, do you think other kids who are scared right now know that God is listening to their prayers too? I hope so, baby. And if they don't, maybe God will use your story to help them understand. Danny smiled sleepily. I hope so too. Everyone deserves to know that God's angels are real and that He never stops listening, even in the dark. As Marla turned off the light and headed downstairs, she could hear Danny whispering one final prayer. Thank you, God, for keeping all your promises. Thank you for making the stairs safe again. The house settled into peaceful quiet, no longer haunted by secrets, but instead filled with the presence of a God who hears every prayer, answers in His perfect time, and never, not ever, abandons His children in their darkest hours.